And now, down in the village, an everyday story of rural life. Today's episode, Drama at the Drama. We had the first rehearsal for the show last night. We're doing The Student Vagabond by Sigmund Pommel. Do you know it? Well, it's always been one of my favourites. I saw John Hanson do it at the Bristol Hippodrome years ago, though I think there may be problems with this production. Well, for a start, it's been produced by that Michael Biggleswick, you know, from the college. He means well, but he's very arty. Him and his lot were the ones who persuaded everybody to do that York Mystery Plays, the Easter Before Last, instead of an Agatha Christie, like we usually do. Mystery Plays, my God, any child could tell you who did it. And they all wanted to do that Waiting for Gobbo by that St Samuel Beckett for the main production, when the committee had already decided on the reluctant debutante. Now, to give him his due, he does know a lot about drama, but his taste is too highbrow. Anyway, the committee decided to let him have a go at producing the show, so he had the first choice of what it should be. He wanted to do The Threepenny Opera by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. Do you know it? Well, I'd heard Bobby Darin singing Mac the Knife, but I didn't know the rest. To be honest, it's a bit racy. I mean, I'm no prude, but a lot of it wouldn't go down well in the church hall. Some of it just wasn't necessary. Well, the second choice was Mrs. Jones. You know, the editor's wife, thinks she's the star. She wanted to do The King and I because she fancied herself as Mrs. Annell. And she'd only asked Mr. Chow from The Takeaway to be the king. Well, I mean, his voice is even worse than hers. So we decided against The King and I, but the committee did tell her that she'd get a good part in The Student Vagabond, which was the start of the trouble. Oh, it's a lovely show, The Student Vagabond. You know it? There's some lovely songs. There's All I Bring You Is a Tulip, yeah? And Give Me Them, yeah? And that lovely duet they just sing in Act 2, Sweet Rosa. Sweet Rosa, be mine forever and a day. Oh no, sir, not thine forever, you may say. Come closer, I'll pine if ever you go away. Sweet Rosa, be mine, oh mine. Well, they may be old-fashioned, but at least they got a decent tune to them. Anyway, we had the auditions a couple of weeks ago, and Michael sent the scripts out. Well, I had my script already, being the pianist. Well, usually I'm the pianist, only this time Michael has asked me to be the musical director, which means like being the pianist. I was quite surprised when I saw the cast list. Well, I knew there would be trouble when I saw that Mrs. Jones had only been cast as Alice the Nun. Not that I blame him, mind you, especially with her voice, but he doesn't know how difficult she can be. At least that's what I thought, but... Anyway, the main part of Sweet Rosa, the barmaid, went to Sally Grossfield, you know, who played Cinderella in the pantomime when we had the Unpleasantness. Oh, she's a lovely girl. She won second prize in the beauty contest at the county fair a year ago. Not that she's going for that kind of thing anymore, but there's no reason why she shouldn't. But she doesn't mind anybody in the village knowing that she's, you know, she's taken to wearing this badge with Dyke written on it. Just there. Well, I admire her courage, but I can't say that it's necessary. Not that everybody doesn't know anyway after the Unpleasantness at the dress rehearsal of the pantomime. But that was the big surprise, you see, because you know my friend Brian, who has the hairdressers in the high street. He has the salon Highlights, used to be Vitaldo of Florence. Well, we were just finishing breakfast the other morning, and the postman came, and it wasn't old Mr. Humphreys, you know, it was young Charlie, blonde, attractive fellow. And he brought this parcel for Brian, and so I said, well, what is it then, Brian? And he opened it, and it was from Michael Biggleswick, and it was the script, and he'd got the main part of Prince Roland. Well, we were both quite surprised. Not that he's, oh, you should have seen him in his uniform in The Reluctant Debutante, but after that business at the dress rehearsal of the pantomime, there can't be anybody in the village who doesn't know for certain about him and me being, you know, I mean, not that I mind or care what anybody thinks, but it's just that after that, we thought he wouldn't get any good parts. Mind you, you should hear him singing in his bath. He sounds like Mario Lanza. He does. Anyway, that was the cast. Well, I did think at the time, I wondered if Michael Biggleswick really knew what he was doing, what with Brian and Sally playing the young lovers, and both being, you know, and Mrs. Jones as Alice the Nun. Anyway, we had the first rehearsal last night, as I said, and everybody turns up because they always want to see what's going on. And so we had a run through the first act. And do you know it, The Student Vagabond? Well, perhaps I ought to set the scene. The Student Vagabond by Sigmund Pommel was written in 1925, and it's set in Arras, that's in France, during the 14th century. Well, it's ever so historical. I like that. It makes it more interesting, though. Mrs. Neat's going to have her work cut out on the costumes again, and there'll be all that trouble with getting some of the men to wear tights. Well, we had that a couple of years ago when we did that Shakespeare. Some of them said they weren't going to wear tights even if they were historical. Anyway, the first scene is set in the inn in Arras, and Prince Roland, that's Brian, is in disguise as a poor student because he's in love with sweet Rosa, the barmaid. And all the students are all sitting around the tables, and I want to explain, they've all got these great big beer mugs, which are called steins, or steins, that's right, where they'd write it stein, but they'd call it stein, because that's the French for beer mug. And they're all saying, we're all gay students together, such gay students are we, happy in fine or stormy weather, as only student kind can be. We're never bother with lectures, for Latin's all Greek to me. We're all together feeling fine, some Rosa bring another stein for oh such gay students. We're all such gay students, we're all such gay students are we. Well, Brian does it lovely because he's got a lovely voice, but some of the other students do look as though they ought to have graduated an awfully long time ago. Well, everybody always wants to be in the show, you see, so for this show that means they all have to be students, but, well, for a start, there's old Arthur, he must be 75 of his day. Well, the committee decided it was dangerous to let him go on with doing the special effects after he set fire to Mr. Lover from the bank when he was playing the demon in the pantomime. Anyway, the committee told Michael that Arthur would have to be a student, so I suppose he'll be all right once he gets his wig. Anyway, Michael tells everybody what to do during the number. They're all sitting around and they've all got these beer mugs and everything because they're all asked to bring a beer mug if they have one. And you know Mrs. Penny lives down the other side of the vicarage? She's got this collection of beer mugs that she got when she went on her coach trip to Austria, sort of pottery ones with pointy lids. Well, you might think that was very nice, but the trouble was, when they lifted them off the tables, and there was 8 of them altogether, I counted, they all start playing little tunes. So it's raise a chair and lift your stein, and the next minute there's Edelweiss and Dr. Zhivago and I Love to Go Wandering and heaven knows what, all going on together. Anyway, the next thing is that Michael tells Brian what to do during the number. They're all singing we're all gay students together and he says that Brian should be going around giving them all big hugs and patting them on the bottom, and when he gets over to the corner where young Charlie is, he should reach over and give him a great big kiss on the cheek. And well, I didn't like to say anything because I thought, you know, he knows what he's doing, but it just struck me at the time has been a bit odd. Anyway, the next thing is that Mr. Lovell from the bank comes in because his burns are all healed up now, and he's need to come in because he's the messenger who comes to say that the Duke of Beaujolais has raised an army and is going to attack Arras, which is why they all just sing Abba Beaujolais. Now, Brian starts this one, and then they order sort of to join in as it goes along, like this, right? Will you serve a stranger? No! Beaujolais so grand. No! Let's show him there's danger. Yes! In our native land. Abba, Beaujolais, Abba. Abba, Beaujolais, Abba. Show him he cannot kick our Arras into rubble. Show him the kind of men we are. Abba, Beaujolais, Abba. Abba, Beaujolais, Abba. Show him that if he kicks our Arras, there'll be trouble. Abba, Beaujolais. Well, Brian does it lovely because he's got a lovely voice, but Michael stops them halfway through and tells them to put a bit more fire into it because they're all just sort of singing Abba, Beaujolais, Abba. Well, it was feeble. So Johnny Palmer from the farm, who's a bit uncouth, says, well, I don't understand this song. He says, what does Abba mean? So Michael tells him that Abba means down with in French. And Johnny, old big mouth, goes, oh, bugger me, which they all think is terribly funny and all starting laughing. And old Arthur asks what it was he said. Well, what I realise now, of course, is that what Arthur wanted to know was what Michael had said, not what Johnny had said. Because when they all started again, Arthur comes in with bugger, Beaujolais, oh bugger, bugger, Beaujolais, oh bugger, which they all think is terribly funny and all join in with bugger, Beaujolais, oh bugger. So Michael says, all right, he says, we'll have a break now and you can all go off to the Queen's Arms. Only he asked Brian and Sally Grocefield to stay behind. So I thought perhaps he was going to go through Sweet Rosa. But in fact, he says he's not really sure how to do that number and perhaps they might leave it out altogether. Well, I said, you can't do that. That's everybody's favourite, what they'll all be expecting. Only just at that very minute, Mrs. Jones comes finally walking in. I thought she was going to start sulking, but instead she's all over Michael Biggleswick and darling Michael and all that. And then she gets this book out of her bag and says that she's really enjoyed it and she saw exactly what he means. So he takes the book and he gives it to Brian and says perhaps he'd like to read it. So I said, well, why is it then, Brian? And Mrs. Jones says, I think you will find it particularly interesting. And Michael Biggleswick says that it's this new autobiography by somebody of Sigmund Pommel, who wrote The Student Vagabond. And the man who wrote it has this theory that although he was married with 3 kids, Sigmund Pommel was secretly, well, the thought crossed my mind at the time that how on earth did they ever know? And besides which, what difference does it make anyway? Anyway, Mrs. Jones says, all funny in the way that she has that, she says, can we do my number now, Michael? And he says, all right, Prue. Wow, I've never known to let anybody call her that to her face, not even Mr. Jones. So I thought, hello, something going on there. Anyway, Michael Biggleswick says he wants to do All I Bring You Is a Tulip. So Sally says, can't you go off to the pub in that case? And he says, no, he wants her to stay because she's got a bit to do in this number. She said, well, surely I haven't. He said, well, no. Well, perhaps I should explain. You see, Alice the nun is the daughter of the Count of Amsterdam, and she'd been in love with Prince Roland a long time ago, only her father has made her a nun. So she comes to find him before he goes off to fight the Duke of Beaujolais, and she sings this lovely number. All I bring you is a tulip, so bring your tulips to me. Love has got me in its vice grip, only you can set me free. Oh, it's a lovely number, but not the way Michael Biggleswick wants to do it. He has Alice the nun, that's Mrs. Jones, give Prince Roland, that's Brian, the tulip, only instead of them singing the duet together, he has Prince Roland sitting down at the front gazing at the tulip all wet, whilst Alice the nun is up behind him trying to pick up Sweet Rosa the barmaid and sing the duet with her. Well, Sally says, why on earth should they do it like that? And Mrs. Jones says, oh, I agree with Michael wholeheartedly. So I said, well, why on earth should they do it like that? And Michael Biggleswick says, no, you're not going to believe this. Michael Biggleswick says that it's obvious to him that Sigmund Pommel wrote the whole thing about his own private life, and that Prince Roland is really in disguise as a poor student because he's a decadent nobleman who fancies working class boys, and this is the only way he can get at them, and the ruling classes are all decaying, and that's why Alice the nun is trying to get off with the Sweet Rosa the barmaid. Well, I said, and Sally said, now wait a minute, just at that very minute, everybody comes back in from the Queen's Arms going, bugger, Beaujolais, oh bugger, bugger, Beaujolais, oh bugger. Well, Michael avoids answering any more questions, and he says he wants to do the final finale to Act 1, which is where Prince Roland, that's Brian, just saying, give me men. Give me men. I need men. Give me men, lots of men. I need men, I say again. Give me men, more than 10. need men, I say, and then when I've met lots of men, I will fight to the right with the height of the might in my sight. Until then, give me men. When I'm men, I will say again, amen. Well, Brian does it lovely because he's got a lovely voice. Only Michael Biggleswick says, I'm sorry, Brian. He says, I'm afraid you've got quite the wrong ideal. I want you to remember what I said before about Prince Roland, and you know Love. He called him Love. Give it a bit of squish. Really camp it up. You know what it's like when you fancy an army. Well, that did it. Both Sally and I both started talking together. Only eventually Sally turned to me and she said, you tell him. And she stormed to the back of the hall. And I said, now listen, Michael. This is absolutely ridiculous. What we want to do is the Student Vagabond, the way everybody will be expected to see it. Not any of your funny ideals. And he says, well, I would have thought you would have been glad to see some gay characters on the stage for a change. Well, I said to him, is this your ideal of gay characters? Princes who act like princesses and nuns who go around trying to pick up barmaids. My God, if I want to see things like that, I can see things like that on the bloody television any day of the week. Do you know, Brian and I have been living in this village for I don't know how long. All right, we are like that, but we don't go around behaving like that. Not that it would be anybody's bloody business if we went around screaming our heads off if we wanted to. I'm sick to death of all we ever see of people like us in anything is silly, wet idiots with limp wrists. Or why don't we ever see any normal people like Brian or Sally or me? And why do we always have to be the villain of the piece? I'm sick to death of it, Michael. Now, what are you going to do about it? What will Michael Biggleswick do about it? And what has he been doing with Mrs. Jones? Will old Arthur's wig arrive in time for the show? And will all the beer mugs be trained to sing in harmony? Stay tuned for the next exciting installment of Down in the Village.